computer, then we'll start. So, your book, Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airmen's First-Hand Account of World War II, is an outstanding book and covers so much more than World War II. It documents the great Black aviation pioneers that came before the Tuskegee Airmen. It's an amazing read that I recommend to everyone. And so let's just jump right in, sir. In your book, I read about your early exposure to aviation, a walkthrough of the Dornier DOX flying boat. I didn't know what that is. I had to look that up with your father. Aviation thing, comic books, seeing military aircraft like the B-10 bomber flying over your home in Queens, walks up to the neighborhood airport, which later became LaGuardia Airport, and how at 15 you'd already learned to identify many of the different airplanes. Describe what the dream of aviation meant to you.
Yeah, well, that was, well, I have to remember Dad, you know, he put $1 out of each of our pockets there in order to just go through this flying boat, the Dornier X. But anyway, I was just about 11, 12 years old there at the time there. But it was just a thrilling experience to go through that flying boat, which had flown all the way over from Germany. It had two routes that it was taking at the time. One was to South America and one was to the United States.
So you grew up in a multi-ethnic neighborhood. Your book says your mom shielded you from the realities of racial prejudice in America in the late 30s and 40s. And early 40s. Describe your move to the colored car experience on the train south to Tuskegee. I read about that, you know, that when you got on the train at a certain point going south in DC, Union Station, they said, okay, you got to go to the colored car now. Describe that experience for us.
Well, to start it out was, you know, my mother was born on a farm in Virginia, in Gloucester County, Virginia. And my father was almost the same. He was born in Virginia also, but he was born in Phoebus, Virginia, which is very close to Hampton, Virginia at the time there. But they grew up under under a prejudiced social status at the time there. And moved to New York. And about 2 years after I was born, they moved to New York, and we moved to Corona, which is a borough of Queens in New York City. And most of our neighbors were white, and most of them, or a lot of them, were from recent immigrants, second and generation Italian, Irish, German, Jewish, and that type of thing. And in the block that I lived on there, I guess there were about 10 or 12 families, of which most of them were white. And I was the only, or ours was the only Black family on that block there. So naturally, we all went to the same school. We all went to the same movies on Saturdays. We all played together after school out in the streets there, and we were over each other's houses and that type of thing. So I did not know or have any firsthand knowledge of segregation, as was in most of the states of the United States at the time here, especially in the southern states. And there was a imaginary line that ran through Washington, D.C. and went west through other states there, and it was known as the Mason-Dixon line. And it meant that, as far as I was concerned, was that any states that were within that Mason-Dixon line, they had segregation as far as the totality of life and social intercourse was concerned there, to the extent that it was backed up by the law, and that this was a part of the law. If you violated that, you could be arrested. But getting up to where you were talking about, my first trip south there, when I got on the train to go south, that was when I was called into the military. And I guess there were, in the block that I lived on, about 5 of us that were going to leave the same day and head south to various military camps there. And of the 5 of us, 2 of us were black and 3 were white. But anyway, we got on the train at Pennsylvania Station in New York, and we started traveling south. And finally, we got to Washington, D.C., through which that line I was telling you about, the Mason-Dixon line, passed through. And it was at that time that the conductor came into our car where the 5 of us were seated, and he pointed to me and he said, you will have to move up to the Jim Crow car. And I knew what that meant. My parents told me what was going to happen, and to pre-warn me. And the white kids with me, they said, oh, Harry, we'll go with you. They thought that I was getting some kind of special accommodation. And the conductor told them, no, that's a segregated car, and that's for colored people. And the rest of the cars are for the white people, and the colored people go. And the white kids, they were astounded. But I said, no, I'm going up front there, and you guys, thanks very much, and we'll meet some other time. But anyway, I went up to the Jim Crow car, and a couple of hours after I was in the Jim Crow car there, the conductor comes along and says, do you have a military meal ticket? And it's a meal ticket that the military had given me along with my ticket, that I was to get a meal on the train because of the length of the trip from New York down to Alabama. And I says, yes, I have a meal ticket. He says, well, they're serving now. Why don't you follow me back to the dining car, which I did. And followed them back to the dining car. And we passed all of these whites sitting in the dining car there. And then at the end of the car, there was this small table. And the conductor set me down there. And as soon as I sat down, he pulled this curtain around me. I remember it was, I can't remember whether it was blue or green, but it was like a shower curtain. And that was so my presence wouldn't offend the whites that were on the train there. But that was my introduction to segregation as I would know it throughout the South there. Of course, when I got to Tuskegee, the base that I was on there was 99% black. So in effect, there was no segregation as far as it's concerned. Is that we had our own facilities and that type of thing. So that was my introduction to segregation, which I did see to some extent or other throughout my service that I was in the service.
Thank you, sir, for sharing that. Your entry into the military is almost a miracle in itself. I read that you overcame polio, systolic heart murmur. I read that you faked a reflex in your right leg to pass the physical. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, when I was coming up, I had the regular, childhood diseases, except that at the time there was a pretty serious virus that was going around called polio. And at 4 years old, I got this fever, and overnight, the nerve in my right leg, one of the nerves in my right leg was attacked, and I lost the use of that nerve there. But I overcompensated or compensated for it as time went on and as I grew up, so that uh, and instead of being right-sided the way I was, I'm right-handed. I had to become left-legged, and I was able to compensate in my walking so nobody could notice that I had this slight handicap as far as it was concerned. So I paid it no attention from there on. And then while I was in high school, I was given an exam. I wanted to go out for the track team, and I was given this physical exam, and they said that I had a heart murmur, and they restricted me from the physical education programs that they had at the time. But I didn't pay that much attention to it because I had no pain or anything like that. I was feeling fine. And but this heart murmur followed me on through the rest of my life, which I still have. But anyway, when I got down to Tuskegee for the examination, they I was able to hide the problem with my leg there, but you know they give you this Achilles tendon test, you know, where they hit you with the wooden mallet or the rubber mallet, you know, and your knee, you have that reaction from the nerve, and your foot kicks ahead and stuff like that. And so I realized what was going to happen, and I says, "Well, I'll have to fake this thing." So anyway, when the doctor hit me with the mallet there, I kicked him, and I guess I passed. You know, I was able to hide that thing from him. So
It never affected you. I'm not a pilot in terms of
no,
controls.
no. I have a limited use of my right foot as far as being able to stand up on it is concerned there, but it's not debilitating, hardly debilitating at all. And I was able to compensate for it so that nobody but me knew what was happening as far as the infirmity was concerned.
Yes, sir. So there's a in your book there's a mention of the college training detachment. It's the first place I've ever heard any mention of that. And basically, I'm going to kind of summarize from your book. It says 4 to 6 months, students with a high school diploma or no diploma would get training in math, physics, geography, history, English. Tell us about your 6 months in this program.
Yeah, the first graduates in the program in the throughout the country, and irrespective of race there. Uh, uh, I think the requirement was 2 years of college to enter the cadet corps. And after the war started, we had a terrible time. We were suffering, and that's the total Air Force, or total Army Air Corps, suffering very, very, very severe losses. And they need to make up these losses by getting people in. Well, the problem is that they would have to go into the ranks of people who were below the college level. And they rationalized that, well, what we can do is we can go ahead and eliminate the requirement as far as education is concerned, and we'll put out this test, a 150-word test that they had. And if you could pass that test, they would accept you into training into the for pre-aviation cadet training. And they would do this by sending you to a college and immersing you into one of these uh, courses that gave you high intensity training and the subjects that they would like you to bring you up on, such as math and physics and some of the subjects as that. So what they did is, and this was colleges throughout the United States, the government gave these contracts to colleges throughout the United States, Harvard and Princeton and colleges like that, and Tuskegee was one of them, and said we will form this group called the College Training Detachment, and it'll be a 6 months training of this deep immersion in the college training there, and after that time, we will go ahead and move these people over to the military cadet corps. And that's what happened to me and happened to a large number of the Black cadets that went to Tuskegee. And all of them came through the college training detachment. And the reason you had that 2 months to 6 months and that type of thing is when they started it. The people that had the highest scores, they, in order to make up for the deficit, as far as the numbers were concerned, that were training to fly at the time there, they moved them over to the air base immediately. But those who had the lowest scores and the lowest background as far as academics was concerned, they were in the college training detachment for 6 months. Okay. And I was in that group there in the college training detachment for 6 months.
Right, and I read that your decision not to graduate was based on your decision to drop out and get a job, make some money.
Well, that's right. And money was, all of a sudden, the war effort started, and this money started flying around, and what had happened is that it was a case of my following my peers, the kids that were in the block there. All of them were getting these jobs with the government and getting this good money, and I decided I'd do the same thing. And it was a way also of helping my parents out, and that type of thing. So I don't think I should have quit school, but the intent was good at the time.
Understand.
Right.
There's a statement in Alexander Jefferson's in the forward of his book. I'm going to read it to you. It says, there were, as Alexander Jefferson's story makes clear, thousands of African American families with academic and professional degrees just as impressive as those found in the white community. In fact, the average Tuskegee Airman had better academic credentials than his white counterpart. Tell us about how the Tuskegee Airmen were selected, this notion of them being the best and brightest from the African American community. How does this account from Alexander Jefferson's book fit in with what you just told me about the CTD, the College Training Detachment, and the quote from your book that anyone could learn to fly if given enough time?
Yes. Well, Alex, he was somewhat ahead of me there. He was about a half a year ahead of me, and he was a college graduate at the time there. And this is true as far as a lot of the Black cadets were concerned there. And this was the reason I say this is that when they started, there was already as far as the whites were concerned, a cadet corps and a pilot training schools available, but there were none for Blacks because they did not accept the African Americans. So they had to start out somewhere. So in order to start out there, the first groups of Blacks that went into the cadet corps were in a way handpicked. And they went and they deliberately sought uh, African American youth that had a high level of college training to start them out. Uh, after maybe a year of that search, they then formed the college training detachment, at which time is that youth like myself who had no college uh, at the time there could take the examination, and pass the examination, go into the college training detachment. So uh, Alexander was talking from his time forward there. I'm talking from my time backwards, to the end there.
You still maintain that anybody can learn how to fly? I know you said there was constraints for the war where they had to crank people out, but you really feel like you could take just about anybody, put them through schooling, and get them ready, and get them in the cockpit and let them fly?
I instructed for a while, and both as a military and as a civilian. And what happens, and I think we've all experienced something like this, but that's running into a brick wall or an obstacle in your training, and that you have a little difficulty in getting over it. But you eventually get over it if you work hard enough and you're given enough time. The problem with the Aviation Cadet Corps during wartime there, they had no time to wait for you. So if you ran up to that wall and you were temporarily stunted or temporarily couldn't get over that wall there, they couldn't wait for you because the war is going on there, and that's what happened there. So that's why I say, given enough time for you to climb over that wall there, anyone can fly.
Got it. Got it. Next question. Kind of along the same vein. I read in your book that you had a rough start in flying training with Archie Smith. Describe how you overcame it and then went on to be very efficient at figure eights, lazy eights, acrobatics, and were one of 26 aviation cadets who made it out of an initial 75. And out of that 26, one of the 18 that got assigned to fighters.
Yeah, I'm sorry. As far as Archie Smith is concerned, I, uh, I didn't mean to give that idea that I was having a hard time in that thing. Archie Smith was a black instructor at the time there, and I was in the CTD. I was about ready to leave the CTD, and we were given what's known as an orientation rides in small aircraft, Piper Cubs, and we were given 10 hours of orientation, and a lot of us had never been in an airplane before. And Archie Smith, yeah, I presume he was a good instructor because he was a licensed instructor there, and he worked for Tuskegee Institute at the time, and this was a contract was given to Tuskegee Institute for these black instructors to go ahead and give the orientation rides to these students, CTD students that are about to leave there and go over to the air base to start taking the military training there. I got in the plane with Archie, and I was he was instructing me to do certain things as far as the handling of the controls was concerned. And he wasn't satisfied with the way that I was handling the controls. And he came down on me. He really, I would say, threatened to have me eliminated because of my inability to do certain things and that type of thing. But he he upset me enough that the tears started coming out of my eyes there. So when I landed with him, the one of the people who was there, and she was a parachute rigger, knew Archie, and he says, Archie, what did you do to this boy here? And he said, well, he said, I didn't mean to upset him that much, but when he gets over on the base there with these military instructors, they're really going to give him hell. They're going to go ahead and give him a hard way to go. They don't have a lot of hazing and stuff like that. And I was just trying to give him an idea of what it was going to be like over there, and hoping that he could overcome what he's going to run into with those people there. So he says, I really didn't mean to hurt him or anything like that. So that was the whole thing that happened there.
Okay.
But I had no trouble in my flying after that is concerned, and I did fine in pre-flight, not pre-flight, but in primary flight, which is the first phase of flying, and then in basic, and then in basic, I did run into this instructor. He happened to be a white instructor, but he, for some reason, did not like me, and he started using some slurs and uncomplimentary terms over the radio when he was trying to. And but that only happened on one flight there, because when I came down, I happened to mention this to one of the mechanics on the plane there, and he happened to mention this. This mechanic knew the head of the flying group over there, and he mentioned it to him, and that guy got in a lot of trouble there. So,
Sure.
But it's something you could run into in any school where somebody just doesn't like you, or they have a bad day, or I presume that maybe his wife might have been kind of hard on him that morning or something like that, you know. But anyway, that passed okay.
So you were 18. I'm going back to my numbers here. It says 18 of the 26 classmates that you graduated with got assigned to fighters. How did they distinguish who went to bombers and who became fighter pilot candidates, and who became bomber candidates?
Yeah, I was 19 when I graduated from the cadet corps, got my wings and my second lieutenant's bar. While when it was decided by the Army Air Corps that they would train African Americans to fly, they envisioned doing that in a segregated fashion, but this segregated group, they would train them to eventually form a pursuit squadron. And a pursuit squadron would be fighter squadron. And it would mainly be single engine and for one man to fly. And that was all they envisioned at the time there. I'm sure that it was the feeling among the people who were the trainees, as far as this was concerned, that the blacks wouldn't make it. And, you know, we'll just go ahead and arrange something that will be satisfactory at the time, but it will keep things quiet for a while there. But anyway, the idea would be to make people think that we're going to take these guys, these African American trainees, and make fighter pilots out of them, which is all single engine. And what had happened was they didn't realize that some of these guys who passed the examination and would be coming into training there would be pretty tall. And fighter pilots at the time there, they were kind of small. You know, they were like 5'8"-ish, no more than 5'10", and maybe no more than 165 pounds. But a lot of us, like Alexander and myself, we might have been more like 5'8" and maybe 145 pounds, something like that. So that was the limit. But unfortunately, is that we had some guys who were coming in, like a fellow by the name of Chappie
Happy
James,
James, big guy.
and it's a big guy, and he couldn't fit. He could hardly fit in the fighter plane there. So they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the guys that are on the large size there, and we'll form a bomber group. And this is how that happened, where they happened to form a fighter group. And a lot of people who were chosen to go into the fighter group initially were the taller guys, and then even some shorter guys got in there only because they need to make up the numbers as far as they were concerned there.
From the pictures, General Davis looks like he's tall. Is he not over 6 feet tall?
Yes, he was about 6'1", something like that, and
He was slim enough to get squeezed in.
he was fit enough to squeeze in the planes there. And, right.
Okay.
But,
You kind of answered my next question, because I've wondered this for a while, and I'll just kind of quote from your book. Initially, the Army Air Corps doctrine was that, bomber aircraft could defend themselves without interceptors, go in and bomb the industrial capacity of the enemy and destroy their ability to make war. Later, the need for long-range escort fighters was proven out, and so that led into this notion that the Tuskegee Airmen, who were bomber pilots, never deployed. And I always wondered about that. And the question was, do you think that, well, you answered part of it about, based on height, but I was always wondering if, because they place such a heavy premium on bombers, do you think that's why they reserved the bomber mission, more for whites, and were more willing to look at, not like how we know fighter pilots today and how we think of fighter aircraft today, but back then, pursuit aircraft or escort missions more of a support thing? Do you think that played a role? They wanted to reserve this mission for white pilots?
The main thing was that in the very, very beginning of the war, and you can see this in the latest series that they have of Apple, if you can catch up with Masters of the Air.
Okay.
And in the beginning there, they were losing a tremendous number of bombers there. And that was because the bombers were venturing further into Europe there, and they were going so far as to the fighter couldn't keep up with them because they didn't have enough gasoline to take the bombers all the way. And what was happening was that the German Air Force was just having a field day in shooting these bombers down. And these bombers, most of them being B-17s and B-24s, carried 10 men apiece. And that's 10 men you lose if they shot one of those bombers down there. So the idea was to, hoping that we could get an escort plane to intercept these fighters, these German fighters, and to protect the bombers against these German fighters that they had there. And that's what they did as far as the fighter planes are concerned. And the P-51 seemed to be the plane to take care of that. And they could take the bombers, escort them all the way to their targets and back.
But you don't think that the spats and the higher up folks were more reluctant to put black pilots into the bomber mission because they were saving that mission for whites, or it had nothing to do with that?
No, what they did was that they formed the 332nd Fighter Group, which was made up of, initially 4 squadrons, and then they reduced it down to 3 squadrons there. But it was a full group, and they were just as competent and needed just as much as any other fighter group
Right, but the
in the
bomber
country.
unit that they formed never deployed.
But
That's what I'm getting at. I'm trying to figure out why what in your opinion was the reason the bomber group that was formed never deployed?
I think that they would have been, and uh, at the time that they formed them and they were training them, I think the master plan was to send the bomb group to Okinawa along with veterans from the fighter group there, and I'm talking about the blacks now, and that they would form what was known as a composite group, which they did actually form a composite group. But before they could send them to Okinawa, the war was ended in Japan there. They dropped
Okay,
the atom bomb there. And I think that's what would have actually happened. I think that had they not dropped the atom bomb, I think that the veterans who were fighter pilots who were in Italy at the time there would have joined up with the black bomber pilots who were still training in the States and would have been sent to Okinawa and to fly missions over Japan.
gotcha. Thank you. I had never heard that, so I appreciate you sharing that with us. Let's see. Some of your I'm reading out of your book again. Some of your classmates in 44F, June of 44, who washed out blamed their white instructors and check pilots. Your assessment was that they were fair. Your book says you had good relations with all the other white pilots. Further, your book says high standards could be mistaken for racial bias, and while race could be a determinant, it usually wasn't. And the question is, do you believe your experience growing up in a multiracial neighborhood helped you in dealing with white instructors?
Well, I think that I could, I certainly could cope with them as far as I felt that I was having competed with the kids in my neighborhood. I felt as though when I got into the service there, competing with other pilots around who were white at the time there, that I don't think it would handicap me as far as my uh, confidence in myself was concerned there. So, yes, I think that growing up in an interracial neighborhood eliminated that possibility of my not having confidence in myself because uh, of the racial attitudes. Right.
And we already talked about this one white instructor the one bad one you went into. Well, let me ask you the flip side of that question. So one of the things I've written about when I study pilots in our current Air Force in recent years is that it seems like students in pilot training who come from predominantly Black neighborhoods, predominantly, HBCU, historically Black colleges, and then get thrust into a majority white environment tend to struggle more than kids who grew up in a mixed neighborhood or have mixed parents or whatever. And I've called that navigating majority culture or white culture a skill, something else you have to learn in addition to pilot training. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think you're right, and I do think that we learn as youngsters, and that we do have to navigate around the white, predominant white attitude at the time, and that type of thing. So I do think that the Black is under that handicap of striving for the uh, desires of himself or herself is concerned, but also having to fight to overcome subtle, whether it be subtle or not, prejudice, that overall prejudice that you might find in the arena.
So thank you. Thank you. I want to make sure we stay on track here. When the average person, even myself, thinks about the Tuskegee Airmen, they think about training in Alabama. Tell us about your experience at Walterboro Army Airfield in South Carolina.
Well, Walterboro was actually a fighter base, and we were taking our training now to prep us for the going into combat. And that training was taking place at Walterboro, flying P-47s. I was flying P-47s at the time there. And I think we spent about 3 months in Walterboro, and then we went overseas. But it was just a further progression of the training that we were taking with the eventuality of going overseas into combat.
Was Walterboro the place where you had this accidental dogfight with someone and you found out it
Yeah.
was tell us about that.
Well, they had a group similar to the Tuskegee Airmen, a female group that was flying in the Air Force, Air Corps at the time there. And they were good pilots, and they were flying anything from fighters to bombers. And a lot of the jobs they had was delivering these bombers to air bases that need them, and also providing uh, uh, flying in the what do we call it, the air targets and towing targets, tow ship pilots. But anyway, prior to going over the seas, we were assigned an airspace. It might be, if you can visualize it, maybe a quarter of a mile by a quarter of a mile by a number of miles up in the air there, but a space where you can do all sorts of maneuvers without worrying about maybe running into somebody else. And I was in my assigned airspace one day, and another P-47 came into sight. And I was wondering, who is this flying through my airspace? And I took the part of being the aggressor and said, what I'll do is I'll buzz this person and I'll show them a thing or two. And before I know it, this person is showing me a thing or two. Uh, when we stopped our acrobatics and challenging each other, this plane headed to land, and I did the same thing. And this plane landed, and I did the same thing. And this person stood up in the cockpit and took their helmet off, and this flaming red hair fell down around her shoulders. And I said, well, I'll be damned. I've just had my rump kicked by a woman. But she was part of a group called, I'm trying to think of the name of it, the WASPs. That's right, the Women's Auxiliary Service Corps. And she was delivering a plane, evidently, to the base there. But that was back in 1944, I think that occurred. And I guess just before COVID, I was out at a air show out in Wisconsin, and a big air show out in Wisconsin, and the WASP group were out there, and I happened to tell that story to the WASP, and one of the ladies that was in the WASP said, "Oh, I know that person that you're talking about." And anyway,
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Sir, you're credited with shooting down or with downing 3 aircraft. 2 you shot down and 1 crashed as you outmaneuvered it in a close proximity dogfight. What was the significance of that particular aircraft and the situation in which you came upon them?
Well, you happen to mention that, and I'm looking at the screen here, and I think you see in the back there that's an artist's rendition of what you're asking about. And there's my P-51 in front there. And if you look in the back there, you might see a little plane behind me. And that's a depiction by the artist of the plane that was trying to shoot me down that eventually crashed, that I got credit for. Uh, we were on a mission to Austria at the time there, to St. Paulson in Austria. And we were escorting part of the bomb group that we were escorting. And after the bombers dropped their bombers there were 7 of us who were uh, given orders to conduct what's known as a fighter sweep. And a fighter sweep was to fire, separate ourselves from the bombers and uh, attack anything that might service the war effort of the Axis powers there, such as barges on the river, freight trains that are riding the country, motor vehicles that might be carrying arms or fuel for the Axis powers, and any enemy aircraft that might be around. And sure enough, we ran into the enemy aircraft there, and a dogfight ensued, in which 2 of our guys, the 7, were shot down, and one was killed instantly, a fellow by the name of Williams from Boston, Massachusetts. He was killed instantly, and there's another fellow from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by the name of Walter Banning. His plane was disabled, shot down, but he managed to bail out. He was picked up by a bunch of the natives, Austrian natives, and thrown into a jail that was near one of the cities there by Linz. But anyway, about 2 days after being in the jail, there a mob formed and broke into the jail and dragged Walter out and beat him severely and then hung him from a lamppost. I didn't learn about this, and the government didn't know about this until years later. What had happened was some of the witnesses, people that were in the mob there, confessed as to what was going on, and it was investigated by the War Crimes Commission, and they finally put the whole thing together, and that's evidently what happened to Walter.
I read that they had you out some years later in a, like a ceremony to kind of apologize for what happened in that city.
That's correct, is that the Austrian government recanted and decided in 2018. Well, this happened on the situation I'm talking about happened on April 3rd, 1945. And in April 1st of 2018, I was invited by the government of Austria over to Austria for the honoring of Walter Manning and what had happened. And the government, was very sorry, and this was their way of showing contrition for what happened to Walter. And that was it. I neglected to say that when the fight started back in July 1st of 45, uh, I came upon these two aircraft, and they were directly in my sights there, and I fired on both of them there, and I was able to hit both of them. I could see pieces coming off the plane, but just as that happened, one of the enemy planes that I didn't see had gotten on my tail and was trying to shoot me down. And as I said, I was fortunate and lucky enough that I was able to outmaneuver the pilot, and the pilot hit the ground, and the intelligence people back at my base gave me credit, not only for the two planes there, but for the third one that crashed as a result of being outmaneuvered there. So that's what happened as far as I was concerned. Today, so few people know about the incident that happened to one of the pilots I was with, Walter Manning, and his being hung by the mob in Austria there. So when I came back to the country here, I was determined that I would try to get a committee together, and we would try our best to go ahead and get a monument dedicated to Walter Manning in his hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I'm still working along with that committee, and we've got an architect who's designed a monument for us at the time, and now we'll be looking to have the construction take place. But that's the whole story that we have about that fighter episode in Austria.
This Zoom call is scheduled for an hour, may go a little over, so I may have to send you another link so we can finish these last few questions.
All right.
So we'll press on until Zoom tells me that I can't. I have to start another.
Right.
In your bailout over Van Leer, Kentucky after the war, I read that the military didn't give you parachute training, and the first time you ejected was in the middle of a bad storm, and that was your first jump. Tell us about that and the happy ending with the community years later.
Yeah, it was, and it's it's a place in Kentucky that I bailed out over, and at Butcher Hollow. And there was a famous singer by the name of Lynn, who she died recently. Miller, that's right. And I landed, or my plane crashed about 100 yards from her house there. And about many years later, that happened in 1948. And in the year of 2002, I think it was, is that somebody from Kentucky there called me and wanted to know if I was the same person that bailed out. And yeah, I told them, yeah. And they said, well, we've been looking for you for a long time. And there's some weird stories that are going on about your bailing out there. And I said, what are the stories? They said, well, the story we hear down here is that there was a black man that stole a B-52 and was setting up a bombing raid on our town here, and that he was shot down by some American fighters that you had there. Well, I rolled off of my seat laughing when he told me that, but we became fast friends, and as a result of that, I was invited down to Kentucky there to Van Leer, Kentucky, and it was, really Barney Google type of thing there. And I was down there for 5 days, and they made me the what do you call it? The guy that heads the parade marshal of the town and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it had a happy ending.
That is fantastic. Let's see, keep pressing on. So now to the gunnery competition. I read that the pilots for the famed gunnery meet in 1949 were selected by their performance in a previous gunnery training mission at Eglin. And it just so happened that those three pilots came from the three different squadrons of the 332nd. This was before segregation. Tell us why what they called at that time the Continental Air Gunnery meet at Nellis.
That was the official name of it.
What can you tell us why you called it the last hurrah, and what the feeling was from your unit as you entered the competition?
Yes, what had happened was that the Tuskegee Airmen, that's the civilian side of the TAI, they gave this convention. I think it might have been in Detroit, but I was asked if I would write something up about in a booklet about the gunnery meet that we had, which I did at the time there. And of course, that was the gunnery meet was a meet that was asked by the chief of staff, Hoyt Vandenberg at the time there, of a war games that were played before World War II, and this was competition among the different fighter groups there. So this was nothing but a continuation of the fighter group war games that they had before the World War II. It involved a member of each fighter group, or three members from each fighter group to compete. And we were to go out to the environs of Frenchman's Flats, which is about 40 miles distance from the town of Las Vegas. And it was to compete aerial gunnery at 20,000 feet, aerial gunnery at 10,000 feet, dog bombing, skip bombing, rocketry, and I forget the other one right now. But it was a 10-day event, and 12 groups were to compete with one another, three pilots from each group. And they would announce the winner at the end of that 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, the 332nd, which was the Tuskegee Airmen, were the winners. And we won the first post-war fighter gunnery meet there. So this sort of showed the country and the world, and especially the people in the different fighter groups, that we were just as good as any of these other guys that had them. So that's what we did. We won the first, and of course, Top Gun, the Navy started a competition called the Top Gun, and I used that term, and we started using that term just as a generic sort of thing. There is that we meant this was a competition that we have, where the actual term of the competition was called the Continental, United States Continental Gunnery Meet.
So what was the expectation of your unit going there? I read something that said that Colonel Davis at the time joked, if you don't win, don't come back.
He did. Well, I think that was some humor on his part there, but he called us into his office before we went down there. And he said, well, gentlemen, you have this opportunity to display your and do this. And I'm looking for you to really represent us and all this sort of thing. And just my parting words would be, if you don't win, don't come back. Yeah.
Sir, can you tell us a little bit about this little detour you guys took through the Grand Canyon, buzzing past civilians, this kind of
We were headed out,
unsanctioned buzz through the Grand Canyon on your way there?
We were headed for Nevada there, and we had spent the night at Albuquerque, New Mexico. We took off from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there were four of us. There were three who were competing, and then there was a fourth person who was the standby in case one of us something happened to one of us. But anyway, we were on our way to Las Vegas from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the ground kept rising. We were holding the same altitude, anyway, pressure altitude. But the ground kept rising, and all of a sudden, the ground opened up in front of us, and here's the Grand Canyon. So we couldn't resist it. We sort of dived down. So they've got these vistas along the sides of the canyon there where people are standing, looking at the views that they have there. And we're down there flying a little bit below where these people were standing, and buzzing right by. So today we would have been arrested for doing something like that, but we got away with it, and that was it. So it was quite an experience.
Awesome. Sir, you in your book, you give a tremendous amount of credit to the enlisted ground crew for your win of the trophy, and your book also mentions your wartime crew chief, Jim Shipley, a lot. Tell our viewers a little bit about the contributions of these enlisted Tuskegee Airmen and how the team dealt with the death of Sergeant Kenneth Austin during the competition.
Well, the crew chiefs, they were in charge of the airplane as far as its maintenance was concerned. And needless to say is that I couldn't go anywhere without my crew chiefs looking the plane over and taking care of any problem that it might have. And it was so much so as, I'd say to the crew chief, may I borrow your plane? And there was this sort of feeling, whose plane is it, the crew chief's or the pilots, Well, anyway, Shipley was a year older than me. He died just a year ago. And he took care of my plane very well, but he certainly, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have survived that plane there because, he took care of everything on that plane there. Things that I wouldn't be able to take care of myself. I didn't know that much about the engines or anything else on the plane. So he not only took care of the engines in the plane, but he coordinated all of the other people that had to work on my plane there, such as the communications people or the people that handle things like the guns and that type of thing.
So I saw that Sergeant Austin died in the middle of your trophy competition. How did that affect your team's performance? It's a 10-day event. He died somewhere in that 10 days.
Yeah, that shook me up quite a bit. I think it shook the three of us up quite a bit. I'm talking about Temple, the leader, and Harvey, one of the wingmen, and myself there. But the plane that he was in was Austin was in, was a F-82, and it was a twin Mustang, and it had two cockpits. And he had asked one of the pilots of a competing organization if they'd take him, he'd fly him, let him fly one of the missions, competitive missions we had, or it was a dive bombing mission. And for some reason, the pilot did not pull out of the dive bombing run that he was on, and they both struck the ground and they both were killed instantly. So it was quite a shock to us when we heard about it. So I'm sure that it affected our bomb scores a little bit, even though we won the meet there. I'm sure we didn't do as well in the bomb scores as we normally would with that on our mind.
And so I guess I'm going to skip around on my questions and kind of in that same vein, because I read that you lost, friends, even neighborhood friends during your time in the military. How did you handle that? I mean, a lot of people in my generation can't imagine the amount of death and loss that happened in World War II. But I mean, it was very common for folks, you know, I read in one of your accounts where you're sitting in an escort mission looking at bomber pilots and looking at bombers go down with, like you said, 10 people on board or whatever. But you had a neighborhood friend, you had other friends who were shot down, who were killed. How did you handle that?
Well, I guess I, you know, passed it off. Well, it was him and it wasn't me, and it's not that I'm not sensitive to the thing there, but you can only carry so much of that sensitivity with you, and it's a question of survival, and you're really looking out and trying your best for survival there. So it's 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 you think about those people and you think about their for the grace of God go I, but it's I I guess I call it the luck of the draw.
So,
Yeah.
sir, I was looking in your book, and they have after the win, when you guys go back to Lockburn, they had this giant gathering of folks on the flight line. You guys buzz the flight line and everything, all this hoopla. How do we get from there to the trophy being lost and the winners unknown and Zelly Rainy Orr? How does all that happen from all this fanfare to the thing being lost and your name's never being put on the trophy?
Well, I had just about forgotten about it, and what had happened was that right after I was in the service for about 6 months after the fighter meet that we had where we won the trophy, and then I was discharged, and I had just about forgotten about the trophy and all of that sort of thing, and I had started in school. I enrolled in New York University and got my degree in mechanical engineering, and that was because I couldn't find a suitable job as a pilot after I had gotten out of the service, because it was the same old. When I got out of the service, there was the prejudice going into the service, and it still was there when I left the service. But anyway, I had forgotten about the trophy, and then when I moved to Michigan here, there was the TAI convention that we had, and they wanted to know about the trophy there, and I said I didn't know where it was, and I wrote up this thing about I didn't know where it was at the time there, and Zelly Orr got hold of this information some kind of way that we couldn't find the trophy, and she made it a mission for herself. That's right, to find this trophy, and she did, and that's how they recovered it. So it was quite a hoopla when we got hold of it, and it was in a warehouse, as you may have read, in Ohio somewhere, one of the air bases. But today, it's now at that air base, but it's on display.
The Air Force Museum, right? At Wright-Patterson, right?
At Wright-Patterson, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. It's just amazing. I've heard that story from her, and so she recently made a video about it. But it's striking to see the photos in your book where this giant reception of all these people are on the flight line celebrating this accomplishment. You guys are strafing the airfield, and all these people are saluting you, to go from that kind of fanfare and recognition to a trophy, quote unquote, lost in the,
Yeah.
in the warehouse of the Air Force Museum with the names of the three pilots, Temple, yourself, and Harvey, replaced with unknown.
All right, all
It's
right.
just it's just it's kind of hard to grasp.
Right. The
Um, you touched
last
on something. You touched on something about um, not, you talked about prejudice before and after. Here you are, you grew up watching airplanes, posing with pictures of the airplane. I even read where you snuck onto an airport and got caught by the police because you're so enamored with planes. You get a distinguished flying cross, down three fighters, but when you apply for the airlines, you weren't accepted during to do aviation. How did you handle never being able to fulfill that particular dream of becoming an airline pilot?
that's yeah. I guess I did handle it by saying, well, I've got to look ahead, and there's no telling how long this thing will last as far as the negative aspects of airlines accepting blacks and things like that. So it was at that time I decided, well, maybe I'm going to be handicapped if I don't get back to school and get something under my chin there that can afford me but anyway, I decided to go to NYU and got my degree in mechanical engineering and was able to get some pretty nice jobs after that and moved up the corporate ladder there. It didn't stop my flying altogether because even after I had retired, uh, the Tuskegee Airmen in Detroit out here were given 4 aircraft that were out at out in Colorado at the Colorado Springs, and they were surplus aircraft. They're called motor gliders, and they're small planes, but they're gliders, Schweitzer gliders that are self-launching in that they had a small motor on the front there that got them off the ground. And once you got up in the air, if the thermals were right, you could shut the engine off and treat it just like a regular glider. And I actually have gone up and spent a couple of hours up in the air without the engine running and that type of
I've been in one of those gliders at the Air Force Academy, not the powered ones, but yeah, the thought of landing an aircraft without an engine, that I did that once. That was enough for me.
Okay.
I was a passenger. I was not flying it. I would have gone up in it by myself without a engine.
But anyway, I got my license in these things, and I used to take the kids up, neighborhood kids, and give them orientation rides in the motor glider there, and some of them turned out to be airline pilots later on. And there's one girl that she's a captain now, and she's a captain on what airline is that? The one out of Atlanta and Delta. Yeah, and not only she but her husband, both of them are captains. And anyway, yeah. So I had a lot of fun in my 80s and early 90s in flying myself around in the motor glider. And I just before COVID in 2019, I was down with Zelly Orr down in not too far out of Atlanta. And there was a guy down there that had the airport, Peachtree Airport, and they had this P-51, which they made a two-seater out of. There's normally a fighter plane with one seat, but the fuselage tank, they took that out and put a seat in its place behind the pilot in the front there and put a set of controls in there and that type of thing. Well, while I was down there with Zelly and my daughter there, this airline pilot said, you know, I've got this P-51 over here. Would you like to go up in it? And I said, okay. So I guess I was 93 at the time, yeah, something like that. And I got seated in the thing there. So he let me have the controls, and I took it off and got up around 5,000 feet, and I did a slow roll, and then I did an Immelman. And I'll tell you, it was like I had played a 9 inning basketball game. I was so I took it back in, and we landed, and that was it. But
He let you take it off. You took it off.
yeah, yeah, right. And it's like a bicycle, you know. You haven't ridden a bicycle in a long time, but some kind of way you manage to stay upright in the thing and all that sort of thing. And the next thing you know, comes right back to you, you know.
Yeah, the bicycle fall is a little bit different from a fall for everybody.
But
Kudos. That's not in your book. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. I um I was reading one of your books about one of the interviews you did with airlines, the companies. He said, "What would the white passengers say if they saw a
exactly.
black pilot walking out of the cockpit?" What are your thoughts when you hear people saying things today, similar things today, almost 75 years later?
Well, you know, they accept it today, and it's accepted. Nobody, it's a big deal. I see the black pilot walking down the aisle there, and people are still reading their papers or drinking their coffee or whatever it is.
Well,
And
there's a whole anti DE and I movement going on. There's somebody who sparked this thing about United's the particular airline United's DE and I efforts, saying that this move to increase the number of black pilots makes the airplanes less safe.
yeah, who said that? I don't know. I thought I
He's
heard.
some social media, I almost said idiot. I can't say idiot on recording. Some social media personality who started this nonsense that's really kind of got some traction. And we had something here recently with the Air Force on a project I was involved with, where two instructor pilots said that the gathering of minority aviators together in training created a safety of flight concern.
Hmm. Uh,
Yeah.
I when I used to fly around in a T6 when I was in the service there, and I'd be going someplace, and I'd have an empty seat, and you know, the soldiers were in there. Can I get a ride with you this place? You know, they're going home someplace, you know, and they think nothing of getting in the plane and riding with it. They never seem to question, you know, what color I was or anything like that. So that's why I say is that today uh, people, I get on the planes and I do a lot of flying, and they seem to just accept it as, you know, that's
So
it.
as they should.
Right,
As they
right.
I think we're down to the last couple of questions. Yes, you talked about TAI, and I read in your book about I don't know if there's a gathering at Alexander Jefferson's house or somewhere where they got together and started what we now know as the Tuskegee Airmen National Organization. What do you think should be the focus of the Tuskegee Airmen organization after all the great heroes like yourself have joined the Lonely Eagles?
Well, I think what most goes on, I know goes on in Detroit here, is uh, youth and centering the function of the Tuskegee organization on youth, and hoping to give them a leg up or opportunity as far as something in the field of aviation that they might have, but giving them a leg up by giving them some early training and that type of thing. And I was hoping, you know, in my case, is that when I was flying out here with the motor gliders there, taking the youth up, is that it would give them an appreciation or an understanding of what's going on in the air there, and might serve as an impetus for them to seek something further in the field of aviation. And I know it still goes on with what's going on at the Tuskegee Airmen in Detroit here. And
Yes,
it's
sir.
a lot of youth training that they do and youth mentoring.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm down to the last question. I'd like you to finish with sharing some thoughts about your dad and the school they named after him in Queens. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, it's the same public school I went to, PS 92.
Oh,
And my dad didn't go there, of course, but anyway, he did a lot with youth during the time that he was living, and he was very active with the NAACP and youth movements, and he used to pass this school, PS 92, quite often, and he said, you know, that school was built just before the turn of the century. We're talking about 1900. And he says it's time that they had a new school there. And he made it his dream that he would have a new school to replace it. And that's what he did. And he was able to organize enough people and enough politicians and enough money to go out, get them to replace the school completely. They tore it down and put up a brand new modern school. So that's it. So they named it the Harry T. Stewart Senior School. And he told the people, says, be sure you put senior behind there.
don't get it confused with my son.
That's right. Yeah.
Good. I don't know if I told you, but I live about 2 blocks south of Harlem, maybe a little bit more than that, about 5 blocks south of Harlem here in New York. It's where I live. So when I read that you spent so much time,
Where is that you live?
I live off 107th Street on the west side of Central Park.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir.
All right. My daughter was living at 111th Street and right next to Central Park there, you know. But anyway, yeah. How about that? Okay.
I saw all the time that you spent in New York, and I just thought that was fascinating. I thank you so much for this interview, sir. And the book is amazing. I've got through like the first 200 pages. I bought it yesterday, and I was really just cranking. And the more I read, that's why the interview went so long, because I kept finding so much good stuff in your book, and I could have talked about your book forever because
Well,
it,
Phil
it covered so
Handelman
much.
is a great writer. He's good, and we collaborated on this thing. And he was right here where I am now, and he would take notes down. I'd tell him, he'd say, "Well, what happened here? What happened there?" And he'd take the notes down, and we collaborated on it. And then we were supposed to go on a book signing tour, but his wife got ill. She wasn't able to make it. So I had spent a lot of time in 2018 and just before 2019 on book signing tours and stuff like that. So I was going all over the country and that type of thing on a book signing tour.
Repeat his name, Philip Handelman.
Yes, Philip Handelman.
For our audience. Okay.
He's got quite a story of himself, and he had a ranch just a little bit above where I am here up in Port Orion, Michigan here. And he had 169 acres there, and he laid out 2 runways. And he had 2 planes. So he used to fly out of that place there. And this was just a hobby of his. And I used to fly, as I mentioned to you, these gliders out of the airport in Detroit here. So I used to fly up to his ranch every once in a while, pick him up, and we'd fly someplace and go and have breakfast at some place, or he'd come down and he'd pick me up in his plane down in Detroit there. And so we developed quite a firm friendship. And then one day he says, Harry, he says, you know, I'd like to write a book about you. And I says, yeah, that's fine. Just don't involve me. That's all. So he says, no, he says, just collaborate with me. I'll do the writing, he said, and you just tell me the stories, you know.
It's an excellent book, and
Right.
glad that you guys put in the time for it. So I'm gonna wish you goodbye, and I'm gonna let our audience know that on July 4th you will be the happy spring young age of 100.
100, right.
Sir, happy birthday
Anyway,
in advance.
well, are you going to the convention?
Yes, sir. Matter of fact, I'm trying to get you to the convention.
I know you are. I know you
Got
are.
to get
So
a
I told
private
my,
jet to come out and pick you up. I don't know if they'll
yeah.
let you fly it, but we'll definitely pick you up. You
Well,
laugh because I know they let General McGee fly at 100 years old. Somebody let them take the controls of the plane. Rumor has it they had to tell them to slow down. That's
well,
what I was told.
McGee flew in the glider with me. Yeah, he
Okay.
came. He was out there, and we flew together out there. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Well,
hopefully
Ivan, it's
we'll make
sure a
it to the
pleasure meeting
convention.
you.
Sir, it's a good pleasure meeting you as well. God bless
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great day.
Okay.
All right,
Bye bye
bye-bye.
now.